Thank you all for joining us for our first in the series of Managing Complex Change. Today's topic is COVID-19. I'm Louis Wedgbury, Head of Strategy here at ForwardPMX, and with me today is Joel Coppersmith, our Senior Business Director of Data Science and Advanced Analytics. First and most importantly, we really hope your families, friends and colleagues are managing well during this difficult period. Today's presentation aims to provide you with some insights and strategies around managing and navigating the current global health crisis. What it is not is a way to exploit the current climate. We do acknowledge, however, that businesses need to continue to provide for their workers and their families, and so it is important we share with you our thoughts. The webinar will last around 30 to 40 minutes, with time at the end for us to answer your questions. It's worth noting that depending on your current industry and location, some of the content may not be applicable to you or your business, but if nothing else, we hope that it stimulates further discussion. So let's get started. Over to you, Joel.
Thanks, Louis. So the first, topic we're talking about is trying to understand exactly what the situation is and what the implications are for marketers in their thinking and how they understand how to position themselves in this crisis. There are, we think, probably three key points to bear in mind. So first, of course, is the volume of cases in any particular location. There's also the velocity, so that's the kind of maturity of the outbreak in any particular location. So those are related but slightly different factors and require slightly different responses from brands. And finally, of course, the impact on the supply chain, which is absolutely fundamental, because it does mean that some actions simply aren't possible to take because of interruption in that supply chain. There may, however, be kind of alternate solutions available. So I think also at this point it's worth just making a distinction between the pandemic itself and the economic situation, because although clearly they're related, I think it's easy to allied the two. So we have probably a fairly severe economic impact that will be felt in the coming months. But we also have the actual health crisis, and the kind of advice for dealing with the economic impact, while it's related to the advice for dealing with the specifics around how you act as a brand in the health crisis, they still remain kind of slightly different situations. So I just want to kind of make that distinction at this point. So yeah, if we move on now. In terms of the impact, obviously some areas of the economy, some types of businesses are actually seeing a significant increase in activity. Perhaps unsurprisingly, healthcare and within that would include wellness, so kind of fitness and that kind of thing, supplements and so on, as well as more kind of core healthcare requirements. Insurance, again, unsurprisingly, people are looking to find ways of providing extra security, and that involves dealing with insurance and some elements of FMCG and retail. We know obviously groceries are spiking. Some types of cleaning products and so on are spiking. We have, I would say, somewhat mixed messages from our own data that we're seeing from our own clients around things like fashion and luxury. Some fashion retailers seem to be doing quite well, and that could be a function of people spending a lot more time online and at home and that kind of thing. Others not so well. So I'm not sure that we can be absolutely certain as to how those businesses will continue to fare. Travel and luxury clearly are somewhat vulnerable. Travel is directly affected by this. I think that the one note of positivity that we want to bring to this is the fact that typically luxury brands and travel brands are very strong. They have a lot of equity. They tend to have invested much in their brand over the years, and although there is a risk of kind of decay in that equity and that awareness, actually they do have strong foundations for recovery when we kind of get through the other side.
Cool.
So yeah, Louis, go on.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that I think there's, I suppose also that whether these are kind of short-term and long-term impacts, things to kind of acknowledge. So, where we're seeing, depending on industry, there will be different recovery rates. So, luxury, I think, will likely see a faster kind of bounce back than, say, for instance, with travel, because there are, lots of missed opportunities with travel that aren't going to be picked up. And I think there will be general kind of consumer nervousness around kind of moving around other countries post the pandemic kind of being at its peak.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I also think that we don't really know how the health crisis element of this is going to play out. So clearly there's some suggestion that we may be in for, because lots of markets are taking a kind of delay approach to this. In other words, they're trying to keep the total number of cases at any one time low, and are hoping for some relief when the summer months come around and perhaps transmission is harder. But then following on from that, then potentially there'll be a kind of an increase again as we hit the winter months. So there's not necessarily a strategy of trying to kind of end the pandemic in sort of one sort of short, sharp process where there's a lot of cities and countries in lockdown, and you do that for weeks or a few months, and then the problem is over. Actually, it's a case of managing it over time, and what that means is that it's possible to foresee a position where travel will become easier for a period, but then will again become restricted. And so the impact on those industries related to travel and tourism, there is the potential for their disruption to continue for quite some time. However, we can't really tell the future, and I think that's also worth noting at this point. A lot of the stuff we talk about is really positioning people to manage the disruption that's coming, rather than to kind of give firm predictions about what will happen. It's about preparation, I would say, being prepared, having your brands prepared, rather than being able to say that there is a specific course of action that you should take, then if you do this, then everything will be fine, because that completely ignores the dynamic nature of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think it's very much about understanding, that there is no one size fits all. We're talking to a global community today, and obviously that's going to vary by market, by vertical, and by brand. So I think it's, really important that, we're looking at collaboration and kind of building cognitively diverse teams. That means that we can kind of adapt and manage to these varying situations. I think something to really kind of emphasize here is two things, actually, is that firstly, this is an unknown, and we're kind of going at this together, and we're discovering new things every day. There aren't necessarily guarantees or things, absolutes. And I suppose it's really important for us to understand and look to what are kind of the fundamentals and the backbones of effective marketing, which is research and analysis. Because if you're constantly engaging and analyzing and understanding these shifts and how consumers are behaving, you're going to be much better prepared to then be able to kind of pivot yourself as a brand.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's something that we kind of pick up on again and again. It's about remaining oriented to the market, because behavior does change, and it will continue to change. It may change in ways that are not entirely predictable, because they're a response to a changing situation within a market. So the only remedy for that is to keep listening.
Exactly, which I think kind of ties into why we've started talking about this new normal and about this kind of big, obviously global monumental change, and how what it means for us as marketers is there is a shift to looking at kind of new skills that help us face this head on. And I think this is driven a lot by kind of volatility and behavior change, which means that, you know, we need to be in a position where we are able to extract information in near real time so that we can adapt what we're doing, which means automation is, you know, it's a hot topic anyway, but it's something that I think is, you know, increasingly important in this environment because of this constant change. And that kind of fits side by side really well, I suppose, with, you know, being agile and these kind of adaptable rather than rigid approaches, which means that we kind of have fast feedback, and means that teams and agencies and clients can be proactive in their reactions rather than kind of missing the mark. And we're going to talk a bit about that some more in a bit.
Yeah,
so,
just on that, sorry, Lee, just to jump in there, just on that point about automation and missing the mark, I think it is worth just flagging that do check that any kind of marketing automation, emails, so on, messaging that is scheduled is really what you want it to be at this time. Because I mean, I'm sure we have all seen examples of brands who have sent out comms that had clearly been scheduled for quite some time, that has now arrived and is really coming across very poorly. It comes across very tone deaf, not because they've just written it and haven't realized what's going on. It's because they wrote it long before this became a serious situation, and they just haven't thought to correct that or double check it. So just a note of caution there. Please make sure that your own businesses have a handle on that.
Yeah, I mean, as you've touched on, messaging is key. You know, that is the fundamental, as it always has been. Making sure that that is attuned to consumers and isn't jarring or disruptive in a way that is insensitive. So what we've kind of wanted to kind of go about is to look at some of the kind of big changes that we think are driving this new normal. And the first of those is about fear drivers and nesting. So, you know, it's unsurprising that, you know, people, because whether it's that people are wanting to or people are being forced to, that people are moving obviously into their homes and they are nesting. And this comes with obviously a whole bunch of new behaviors, and it means there's an uplift in certain areas and a drop in others. So, you know, when we think of nesting, we think very much around, you know, seeing spikes in things like comfort clothing, people, you know, wanting kind of nice foods, and also, you know, thinking about like things like Netflix, which we've seen obviously that recently Netflix have reduced their video quality to deal with the increased demand. We're also seeing, you know, generally an online being a bigger focus, especially mobile. You know, there's a big trend at the moment of on Instagram with artists doing concerts online, new social media platforms such as House Party growing momentum, and then obviously healthcare, because people are concerned of getting ill, so therefore they're trying to combat that. On the flip side of that, obviously we're seeing kind of some activities that are kind of traditionally associated with being outside in decline. So out of home is obviously taking a big hit, because if you're in, you know, key cities or in certain countries, people are being told to stay at home. That's obviously going on to like bricks and mortar, because, you know, shops are closed, but also I think people are just, you know, concerned to go out even when, you know, bans are lifted. And I think a really interesting one is touch. So, you know, our society has become increasingly focused on this idea of touch. So whether it's our mobile phones or whether it's kind of, when we're dealing with ATMs, things like that. And I think there will be a bit of a kind of repercussion about how much people actually want to physically touch things, now and also after the kind of the big peak of this pandemic. So what we've done,
just on that. So again, exactly right, and that point about touch and self-checkouts. That's another one. We may see behaviours around that changing, but also experiential marketing, shopper marketing as well. Clearly, at the moment, it isn't really possible for many industries because, as Louis says, that those stores are shut. No one is going into them anyway. And it may be that, depending on how the pandemic element of this plays out, people may respond to those types of marketing behaviours differently.
Yeah. So what we've done next is kind of looked at what we think are kind of broadly the big strategic impacts of this, and then some key tactics also around this. So, we're seeing that obviously e-commerce for kind of certain businesses that are set up to manage it is thriving. So the likes of Target are doing well, Amazon, ASOS, these brands are obviously seeing, the benefits of the fact that their people are now kind of spending more time at home. So it's definitely for retailers and businesses that have kind of both an online presence and an offline presence to be investing more in e-commerce and in that ecosystem. I think social listening's a really crucial part of understanding how consumers are responding to the pandemic and also how they're responding to brands. So it's really worthwhile, investing in some social listening or speaking to your agencies or us as an agency about how we can kind of integrate that into our kind of fast feedback and understanding how to dial up and dial down media. When kind of trust levels and fear is high, I think it's important to be really doubling down on your kind of top products where people, kind of are happy with it and guarantee that they know how it's going to function. They don't want to necessarily be branching out and trying new things. And then obviously, and I think Nike have done a really good example of this they were doing it in Hong Kong, about pivoting to messaging towards home activities. So thinking about how is your brand relevant to the home environment rather than the outdoors. From a tactical...
Sorry, I was just jumping there with a couple of points. So that Nike one is a good point, and I think for those who haven't seen it or don't know it, I think their message was, I think something along the lines of, have you ever wanted to perform for millions? Well, now you can by staying home. In other words, by staying home, you are performing a service for millions of people. And I think they are also looking at services that they can dial up for, like at-home workouts and things like that. So it's a really good example of a brand being socially responsible and kind of demonstrating they're being socially responsible, using the clout that they have as a massive brand, but all brands who have a customer base have that opportunity, and also then matching that with specific actions to encourage that same activity. On the top products piece as well, so there's a couple of elements to that. So one is the point that Louis made, which is absolutely correct, around people wanting familiarity. They doubling down on the products that people love is certainly gonna be a worthwhile approach, and also a kind of a practical element to it as well. So certainly in the UK, and I don't know about other markets, but in the UK, some supermarkets have been talking to their producers, their suppliers, asking them to basically reduce the number of product lines they're producing and just focus on the top ones, because they need to smooth out kinks in the supply chain. So they don't want to have 100 different types of cereal if they can avoid it. They want to just have like the 30 top bits of cereal that they know they can get all the time. They know that can be delivered in volume. So there is a practical element too, to help you manage the production and supply.
Yeah, and I think with that production piece, thinking about, say, the luxury brands like LVMH and Prada, obviously turning their factories that obviously normally make luxury items into creating essential items. So understanding that sometimes as a brand, actually, you know, it's about something bigger than your brand, and the fact that it's about supporting communities, and in terms of long term, that's going to have a kind of positive feedback loop, because consumers understand that actually you're, you know, with them rather than sitting on a kind of separate plane. So looking at some of the tactical things, you know, I think as we've talked about, it's quite obvious that obviously online channels are going to be somewhere to focus investment, but TV also, because this comfort economy, people want to kind of still shut off and enjoy themselves, so they are moving, you know, more online and more and watching more television or like VOD. So it's, you know, worthwhile to be looking at putting your investment that maybe traditionally is in kind of print or in outdoors and reinvesting that. I think looking at rich media, there is definitely an increase in people feeling bored. So, you know, having interesting advertising and ones that people can engage with will get much higher kind of interaction rates than you would see normally. Another one is obviously thinking about kind of audio. So, you know, drive time radio is going to decrease because the behaviour's changed. People are no longer driving to and from work. So looking at kind of maybe shifting that money again into areas where you're going to get better returns. So again, like online video. And then kind of making sure that there is some kind of normality around kind of TV advertising. So retaining kind of your key spots and around programming so that people still feel kind of this connection and normality.
So I think we can talk a little bit about the competitive environment now. The market is competitive. So we can talk about, say, absolute growth in, say, market share or share of voice or whatever it may be. Absolute gains and absolute decreases don't actually mean that much. What matters is the gain or loss in comparison to everyone else, and that's where we see the chance for brands to help weather the crisis by looking at looking at how their competitors are spending, how much share of voice they've currently got. So there's this concept of excess share of voice, which really is the amount of reach and visibility your brand has in comparison to your market share. So, for example, if you are third in your market, but you have more visibility, you have kind of the second highest visibility, then you are likely to see your share of market actually increase. And if you're third in your market, but you're spending much less and you're actually fourth or fifth in terms of how visible you are in comparison to competitors, you will likely see your share of market decrease over time. So at the moment, what we can say is that while other brands cut back, there is the opportunity to increase your share of voice in comparison to your share of market by simply maintaining your spend. So not spending more necessarily, just carrying on with what you were doing. The other piece is, of course, that because it is a dynamic and competitive landscape, if all your competitors do decrease their marketing spend, which they may well do, and indeed you may well have to as well, because of pressures coming from within the business in order to safeguard jobs and try and safeguard the core of the business ahead of what's likely to be a difficult economic time. What you need to do is try and maintain budget that is at least in advance of your competitors. In other words, if they pull back their budget, and their reach and their visibility, you can do that too, as long as you are spending slightly more than they are, because you will still get the gains, the same gains. So I think that's worth considering. The other point is that every piece of research that has been done on this going back for many, many years, I was looking at a study from McGraw-Hill that was published in the early 80s, and then many others since then, shows that brands who maintain or even grow investment in their brand during economic downturns always emerge stronger than their competitors. They have significantly higher levels of growth, both through the economic downturn and afterwards. It's at periods like this that market leadership is won and lost. This is a good example of trying to differentiate between the economic impact and the health crisis, because the health crisis might mean that actual activities are impossible to do. You may not have a functioning factory. You may not have, an airline that's running. So you may not want to be investing in lots of marketing because you simply have no service to deliver. That's fine and understandable. When it comes to the economic impact, however, this advice has been shown to be true time and time again. And the other thing is, of course, that and the very presence of familiar brands can be a welcome continuity for people. A lot depends on tone of voice and how that messaging is put in market. But having some sense of familiarity at times when people are feeling very insecure, very anxious, very fearful, is or can be a positive. So also, don't feel like you have to pull back because now is not the time for you. What matters is the message you're putting out there and the behaviors that the brand is showing, the posture the brand is taking. That matters more than simply saying, well, we're just going to cut all our spend.
Yeah, I mean, being sensitive and being a part of the conversation is a really valuable strategy, which kind of ties up really nicely with this. I think that is something to really consider. It's not necessarily about, and it probably isn't about pushing too much of a kind of sales message, especially during when a certain region is in kind of lockdown or at peak. But being a part of that conversation and being there for consumers actually is a really good way of maintaining kind of relevancy. And then when there is an upturn, there is that kind of brand favorability.
Yeah, quite. So some of the ways you can think about this or kind of make this real. Obviously, monitor what the other brands in your category are doing, and how much money they're putting in market, how many impressions, how much reach they're getting. Understand how much you need to be putting in there to see those gains for yourself, and recognize that it's because it's a competitive landscape. You only need to be doing a little bit more than your competitors. You do not necessarily have to be spending as much or more as you were planning to before this situation evolved. In terms of where you can cut that money, out of home we've already talked about. It's likely to be very, very inefficient anyway. Obviously, online, part of the opportunity for online is that when, if the business does need to pull back on spend, and obviously marketing spend is often regarded as discretionary, if it does need to pull back on spend, that can be done much more quickly when you're putting that budget into online channels, and particularly when online channels are actually where most of the attention is right now. It makes sense to be there for both those reasons. You can also look at repurposing creative and looking at some of the cheaper formats you can get online. Just a point on the kind of value of media space at the moment, we are again seeing real fluctuations in the cost of CPMs. For some areas they're up, for some areas they're down. I think the general trend is going to be down, because I think overall, even though more people are online, I think overall marketing expenditure will be decreased, and so that will bring downward pressure on prices. But as always, talk to your agency, or talk to your team, or whoever is doing your media buying, and to try and monitor what those prices are. Also, TV, which clearly is an opportunity when people are spending so much time at home. There are shorter formats that can be used. Often they work best in conjunction with longer formats, but there are shorter formats that can be used that can still deliver a lot of the same impact. And also, trying to produce new creative right now is clearly very, very difficult, because you simply may not be able to get new, shooting is not really possible. So there are lots of other ways that new creative can be produced, whether it's animation or CGI or stop motion using stock imagery, or whatever it may be. There are creative ways around producing brand new stuff, as well as repurposing old stuff.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I think, this increased mental availability because of this boredom, behavior that's happening with consumers, means that things like brand salience is obviously easier to kind of drive and increase. So thinking about that too, kind of making sure that you can identify areas that you can be a part of that conversation. So moving on to our third point, which is volatile commerce and adaptive systems. The main thing here that we kind of want to talk about is obviously that there is so much change happening at the moment. Markets are in flux, and there's, macro influences that mean that, the way in which consumers are consuming products is changing. When in China, when they had their lockdown, obviously it was seen by the stat here that they saw a kind of 20% increase in mobile usage during self-isolation. So understanding those changes in behavior and then adapting what you're doing from a marketing perspective is really crucial. And ways that you can be doing that is kind of focusing more on dynamic media, looking at flexing budgets between different channels and different strategies and different products, thinking about what channels are more dynamic. So, biddable media is something to be thinking more about, rather than, say, committing upfront spend. So, thinking from, again, going to the strategic side of things, monitoring kind of, again, consumer behavior, and then plugging that directly into your strategy, having regular stand-ups with agency partners, with tech partners, research partners, and thinking about how the latest bits of information and shifts can then be plugged into your strategy and then very quickly pushed into media, so that you can be adapting and making sure that the marketing spend that you have is being used effectively. So some of the ways that we might see that kind of coming into fruition is kind of having automated bid optimizations, which are based off kind of key customer signals. Looking at budget allocation, so we have alerts for PMX, so that helps us look at where we're seeing kind of key insights happening, and we can take that data and pass that very quickly into what we're doing in terms of where we're investing our budgets. Making sure that your feed management is up to date, because you don't want to be advertising products that are out of stock because of supply chain issues. And overall, just kind of making sure that that you've got this biddable media focus, so that as and when situations change, you can turn things on or off, or dial things up and down.
So we talked a little bit about supply chains and the impact that this is having on supply chains, and that's obviously pretty fundamental for businesses. I think if anything has shown the kind of need for digital businesses to get serious about digital transformation, this is kind of it, because that ability to really understand exactly how your supply chain is running, to be able to monitor stock levels and top SKUs available, and kind of the last mile piece, and you know, the whole end-to-end logistics and supply chain, and how that impacts, you know, the marketing that you're putting out there is absolutely vital. Like the ability to recognize that, for example, we talked about, you know, a factory in one market having to be shut, and therefore production of one particular product line or one particular component is, you know, severely disrupted, which means that the stock that you have in your warehouse is basically the total amount of stock of that product you're going to have available for the next, who knows how long, a month, 2 months. And then, you know, your ability to actually sell that product in store, it's fine in one market, it's not okay in another market because shops have been shut, so you need to be able to then redirect that product to your kind of e-commerce presence. That whole system really relies on having all the links in the chain connected, and having all that information being supplied to kind of trading and merchandising teams and marketers, so that they can make sure that they are pushing the product that is actually available and pausing advertising or merchandising for products that are no longer available, and also enabling on the back end brands to kind of shift production if that's a possibility. So feed management obviously is one way of doing that. We also look at, I mean, some of the stuff that we do for clients is around forecasting. Comes out of the data science team, around forecasting stock levels and scenario planning to kind of look at connecting various bits of data, SKU levels, search data, typical seasonal trends, and a bunch of other signals to provide as accurate as we can forecasts for how much product is going to be needed. I mean, actually, the kind of just-in-time nature of most modern supply chains has really been, I wouldn't say shown up, but has really shown to be somewhat fragile when a massive and unprecedented event like this occurs, because products that are typically fairly easy to forecast required volumes for, all you need is for a large number, or not even necessarily a large number of people, but a reasonable number of people to buy just one extra of those products. In the UK, I don't know about globally, but in the UK, that's toilet roll, where there's now seems to be shortages because people have bought one extra pack, and lots of people buying one extra pack suddenly means that the supply chain can't cope and can't deliver it, can't produce it and deliver it fast enough to stores. When normally usage is pretty easy to forecast over time. So that's a point on the potential fragility of some supply chains, but also a point about the need to ensure that, as far as possible, businesses are able to connect back-end logistics to front-end merchandising and marketing. And if that's possible, do it through automation. And if it's not possible to do it through automation, or not completely to do it through automation, then do it through communication. Because marketers need to know what they should and shouldn't be pushing at any given moment, and the only way they are going to know that is if they are talking to other parts of the business. I think when we look at it from a kind of strategic perspective, clearly there is, for brands who are able to manufacture in market and aren't reliant on kind of cross-border transport for components or for products, there may be an opportunity there, and that can be messaged. In other words, you can talk about the confidence you have in being able to deliver the product. Also, potentially, there's a chance to perhaps capture a bit more of your total business back from resellers, and that may be necessary to protect the core business in economic downturns. For businesses that have a large wholesale component. Also, I think looking at those resellers and trying to peg your offer against theirs also becomes important, and that does normally require some level of intelligence, software or process. So again, for example, we've built a few tools for monitoring stock levels of resellers of our clients' products and prices and so on, so we can then kind of let them know, okay, this reseller is now changing their price, or they're no longer advertising this, or they're out of stock, or they're advertising that there's only 3 left, and that enables our clients to kind of make a decision as to how they wish to respond.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think what this whole situation is highlighting is that certain elements of of different industries needs to kind of be revolutionized a bit, and I think we can, as a kind of marketing community, can kind of hold our hands up and say that sometimes we're caught within the kind of marketing bubble, and I think this thinking about the supply chain and connecting back-end systems with front-end systems is really important, and for certain businesses hasn't been a key focus, and I think this has highlighted that, and something that we as a community need to be looking at and thinking about how we can kind of integrate more back-end information into our marketing practices so that we are effectively managing things like stock.
So I think the other element that companies need to really think hard about is innovation. Like right now, looking at, I mean, we can already see businesses responding to this downturn with exactly that type of innovation, like retooling, pivoting towards delivering online services when perhaps typically they'd be delivering offline services, looking at changing their proposition so that perhaps things that maybe they would not previously have delivered, they're now adding to their stock so that they can deliver it. I was just thinking today, there's a brand in the UK, like a kind of a healthy fast food brand called Leon, and they didn't really do deliveries. They've now accelerated their push to start delivering. And not only that, they have also started adding everyday essentials to what they deliver. So they're not only delivering their own food and drink that they make, they're also delivering things like milk and eggs and so on, because that's what people need. So look at ways to do that and to pivot your offering. Also, pricing is always a little bit contentious, and some businesses, particularly luxury businesses, they will very, very rarely or never cut prices, and that works for them. Other businesses are kind of quite focused on price cuts, and that works for them because that's obviously priced into their margins. But on the whole, if at all possible, whilst trying to kind of generate cash in the short term may be very, very desirable, particularly when stock prices are under pressure, and there are cash flow needs, it does tend to have a longer term impact. It does tend to make generating cash in the long term a lot harder. because people obviously get habituated to different prices because it has an impact on brand equity, because people are, there's again, we've done plenty of testing of this in my own team, that typically when brands in normal times don't do test price cuts on the basis that it will bring new people into the brand, actually what they discover and what we have discovered on their behalf is that doesn't really happen. People come in, they buy once, they don't necessarily become a repeat customer. So look at opportunities for adding value rather than cutting costs. And again, it still comes back to that need to listen to customers and understand what they want and need at any particular time and remain oriented to the market. Also look at perhaps investing some time into some processes and activities that some of those longer term projects that get put on hold because of short term requirements, that perhaps those short term requirements can't really be fulfilled right now. So now is the time to look at those longer term things, particularly when it comes to e-commerce and conversion rate optimization. Is the gift that keeps on giving. If you improve conversion rate optimization now, then regardless of the economic situation, you obviously benefit. But when the economy does recover, which it will, those benefits will be multiplied. Also look at your customer database. Look at how that's segmented. Is it as accurate as it could be, as rich as it could be, as useful as it could be? And also look at things like customer service at times like this, when people are feeling that anxiety and that fear and uncertainty. Is this working? Is delivery working? If I've ordered something, should I expect to get it? If I don't get it, is that because of a corona related problem, or is that just because there's an issue with the kind of delivery company? Customer service right now will absolutely serve you very, very well, and putting more resource behind that is a wise move. And also, of course, if your business is looking at how you can try and control cost in order to kind of make it through the economic impact, then challenge vendors and suppliers to help you, but also reward them when they do.
Great. So
ability. Sorry, go on, Louis.
Yeah. So I'm just I apologise to everyone. I lied to you about take us. We got chatting, but kind of to kind of summarise here, just before we lead on to some questions, I think kind of the three kind of key takeaways here for us are really around, we've talked a lot about responding to customers and understanding customers, and agility is a big part of that. So it's really important to, going back to my earlier point around making sure that you've got, insights constantly feeding your decision making, both at kind of the top end from kind of, research and third party analysis to understanding just key digital events that are going on within your business, through your online platforms. Making sure that you're linking your media to supply so that you're not over investing or pushing the wrong products, which means that they'll go out of stock, which will then be disappointing for consumers and then also a missed opportunity for you as a brand. And then just making sure that you've got branding out there that's sensitive so that you're staying top of mind, so that when things do recover, consumers are looking upon your brand favourably. So we're just going to open it up to some questions now. Hopefully you've submitted some to us all.
We did get a couple of questions. This is Mary Beth. So one question was, will this presentation be recorded and made available? Yes, it will. Thank you for asking that. And thanks to Louis and Joel for walking through everything. And then did receive a question around B2B. With all the changes mentioned, which do you think is most relevant to companies that are primarily engaged in B2B? Louis or Joel, do you have any thoughts on that? And we can always get back to everyone if we need some more time.
Joel, do you want to go for that one?
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's tough for everyone, but it's really tough for B2B because it's hard to know how to approach your potential customers. And so I think the most valuable point to take out of this is about tone of voice. So yes, people are still working, businesses are still running, they still need the services of other businesses that support them. It's about trying to pitch your offer to kind of the position that they are in, and that means kind of having open and honest conversations with them and kind of trying to be a good partner in that sense. So listening to where they are and what their position they're in and how their customers are feeling, and then trying to kind of reflect that back in how you talk to them.
Yeah, and I mean, with B2B, usually you're dealing with, you know, kind of someone in a procurement team, and therefore those relationships and kind of entering into a dialogue with them, asking them what, you know, they need from you as a brand is a really good way of building those relationships and understanding what, you know, they might need now, but also what they'll need in the future. So strengthening those relationships is probably where I would focus heavily. You know, understanding what your partners need from you and being there with them and navigating this with them is going to be a really valuable asset.
Great. We also did receive a question stating number 5, and this is one of your changes, the innovate seems to counter number 1, which is stick with what you know. How do you balance number 1 and number 5 out of your changes?
So I think, sorry, go on, Lee.
No,
well,
okay.
Yeah, I will. So sticking with your maybe your kind of core products, the most familiar products is kind of what we mean there, and your core offering. But the kind of innovation piece, it's a wide ranging thing. So for example, I've seen lots of brands who are now trying to offer free express delivery, for example. So they are looking at how they can add value on that part of what they do, which previously wasn't core to what they did, rather than say cut prices. They are looking at the example I gave with Leon, with that, okay, they were going to launch a delivery piece. They've now done that a lot quicker because of the environment, and to that they've added a few other daily essentials because that's what people need. So they're small tweaks, but they can make a big difference to the ability of your brand to kind of match consumer needs. So that's kind of where I'm coming from there.
Yeah, and I also think that when we talk about innovation, we're not talking about kind of blind innovation. We're talking about working within existing processes, platforms, data points, and then looking about how that you can adapt them to the current situation. You know, suddenly, if it doesn't make sense for you as a brand to suddenly be going out there and trying something new, we're certainly not suggesting that. What we're saying is that I think in times like this, it's very easy to kind of go into a state of paralysis. And instead of doing that, what we're suggesting is saying, well, think about what's most valuable, what's fundamental to your business in terms of whether that's kind of messaging, products and things like that. And then how can that kind of diversify? How can you adapt that? How can you change that or innovate that to become something that is attuned to the current climate and even kind of excel and make you or your brand a kind of leader within that environment?
Yeah, so like just again another example recently, I think Disney Plus, they decided to bring forward the release of Frozen 2. Normally they would keep that at a fixed point because that's a kind of a allure for people, and it builds anticipation and so on, and perhaps there are other deals in place around where it gets distributed as well. But they decided to bring that forward. So it's not a major change to what they do as a business, but it's a way of providing value, I guess, with an asset they already had, and building positive associations and a kind of a positive view of the company. And I don't think they ever mentioned that it was anything to do with the pandemic. I think they just said, hey, we're going to do this. And people were able to kind of connect the dots and be like, okay, I'm going to be at home. My kids are going to be at home. Now I'm getting this extra treat. You know, this is great. So even just small things like that can be quite valuable.
And that's great, because what you're saying there is saying the strategy remains the same, which is about distributing a new film, but the medium or the tactic has changed. So, and I think that's a great way of kind of summing it up, actually, is that, you know, we're not saying change your whole strategy, we're just saying about innovate with what your tactics are and how you go about delivering that. And Universal have done the same thing with releasing some of their movies online.
Perfect. So we are just about at 1 o'clock, or at the end of the hour here. Louis or Joel, do you have any parting thoughts?
Only that I hope everyone stays well, and everyone, you know, your loved ones stay well, and the economy does need strong businesses, because people need jobs. You know, people need, and so, you know, it's a responsible thing to try and retain a strong brand, because people rely on that for their livelihoods.
Yeah, and I mean, I mirror that, and probably adding to that, I would just say, if you're already one of our partners, reach out to us, engage us, let's collaborate, because it is better if we look at how we can move forward together rather than working in silo.
Great. Well, thanks everyone.
Thank you for listening.
Have a great day.
Thanks.